you tell us about yourself?
I'm Jussi Angesleva, and I'm a designer, splitting time between teaching at the University of the Arts in Berlin and working in a design agency, Art & Com, as a creative director.
What are you teaching?
The program is called Digital Media Design, so go figure what it means.
What is AR you are talking about?
Well, AR is, of course, it's a very populist term describing a technology, but if you take the words apart, they mean augmented and reality. They're much more open-ended. So, but just like virtual reality, we all know what virtual reality kind of means, even though many critiques would argue that virtual reality has very little to do with virtual or real. So the same way augmented reality, we know what it means, so it's sort of using display or a head-mounted layer with which we can add digital information layer between the viewer and the world, the physical world around.
Why are you so interested in AR in your field, like media art? Why are you interested in
digital media design, or any sort of discipline of design that has to do with technology? That's what I'm interested in, and AR is one technology. So I'm not specifically interested in AR as such, but I am interested in AR as one feature of what the sort of computer-mediated culture we're living in is changing.
What do you think about what AR could influence our life in the future?
So, of course, the promise of augmented reality is that we can have this sort of seamless, immediate experience of the world around us, just like with the just like everyday experience, but having an extra layer of information. So instead of having interfaces that are always separate from the interfaces they are for, AR has the promise to make this sort of seamless integration. Today the problem is still very much that the display technologies through which you can use AR are cumbersome. So the first wave in the, let's say, early 90s of augmented reality was based on these big head-mounted displays and these kind of goggles, and everybody's always kept on talking that technology is shrinking, and in near future we will have cool-looking, fashionable sunglasses that are actually also an AR head-mounted display. That hasn't happened yet, but in parallel, suddenly mobile phones have cameras, and they have enough computing power so that you can hold your mobile phone in your hand and see the live camera feed and then do augmentation in that. Now this is very different on one hand, because the head-mounted display variation of augmented reality was always based on the idea that the reality is not mediated. So you don't see pixel screen of the real world, but you only see the augmentation as a layer added to it. With the mobile phone in between, you always see the camera picture of the reality and then the augmentation on top of that. And of course this is like 2 steps further away from the reality, the immediate experience of that. So, which is still, it's not to say that it's any worse, it's just very different. So it's the sort of vision of augmented reality has kind of shifted because of the technological development through which we consume it today. At the same time, there's different ways that people see it's usable. So we have these labels. You walking the street and you point your mobile phone into a building, and then you see the label of what's inside that building. Now it's nice gimmick, but I'm a little bit suspicious that that kind of augmented reality, it's not gonna stand the test of time, because the informational value of being able to see the label directly on the building is novelty. It's not necessarily any easier for you to comprehend the meaning of the building. You could point the device at the building, at which moment the building would get recognized, and you would have some more simplified view of what that building contains that is very easy for human mind to decipher without having to have this cumbersome hold your both hands and try to look at the world through the small screen. So so I think we haven't yet reached the new true potential of AR. So after the head-mounted display is now kind of in the background, and now it's mobile devices, but even at that, it's the sort of, there's lots of expectations where it might be usable, but there's no killer app yet, I think.
I saw yesterday your work, artwork in bank in Germany. It's very impressed, I thought, and it's very art is. I think art is a new form. When it becomes new form, it influenced people a lot. So I think it's quite good stuff for artists to use AR. What do you think about it?
Yes, I completely agree. On one hand, though, artists normally, there are many reasons why artists would use technology, but I feel that lots of it has to do with the sort of potential people see in the technology in the sort of public sphere. So, avant-garde kind of art has always been sort of a counter-reaction to the status quo of how you are expected to be using given technology. So it's sort of misuse of technology. Now, you can't really misuse technology before it's there. So maybe in the context of AR, the challenge is that the mainstream is yet to catch up, coming up with the forms that people really adapt full on. And at that point, the counter reactions are much more kind of, content-wise motivated. So technology, by enabling technology without any practical use, can be a good building block, but that's not a motivation to start use any one technology. The motivation for me, at least, comes from understanding of how a given technology integrates with life in the first place, and then you start questioning that, and then do something else.
You talk about technology, art, and design yesterday, and can you talk about a little bit more, please?
Yeah. Well, it's a big world, technology, art, and design. What I already just said now about the sort of the technological arts, of course, again, going to the sort of etymology of the works, of course, all art is technological. Pen and paper is human technology, and so is TV, and so is computer, and so is AR. So all art is implicitly technological, but of course in this case you are referring to more the sort of digital arts perhaps, and the sort of using modern cutting edge technologies, and in that case, as I already said, the idea that the art is questioning the status quo is very important. In design, it is also very important, but for me it's slightly for a different reason. So for our studio, we get, like many times, companies approach us because they want to have this sort of high-tech highlight to the environment they're building, or their headquarters, or the showroom, or the museum, or something else. Now, if you ask for high-tech highlight, there's already lots of kind of expectation and motivation that is completely separate from the actual meaning or the substance what that technological highlight should be talking about. So let's say we would do a project with the historical museum. Their substance is telling the history of something, let's say the history of a country, and then they ask us to do the technological highlight. But what we should communicate through the technological highlight is still part of the history. So it's the sort of a surface story can be completely different from the kind of motivation to put high-tech stuff into the experience, because that way audience who will come to this space later on, then they talk about it, there was this amazing thing, it did this internet blah, wireless, moving, kinetic, whatever it may be, that it becomes like a meme with the story. So as designer, I am always kind of really trying to balance or trying to keep my head clear what should be the core motivation of using technology. It should not be, from my point of view, technology for the sake of it itself, but it should be a communicating medium to tell a story. Sometimes the story is related to technology. Then you can do more this kind of self-congratulatory, high-tech, very visible technological installation. But when that's not the case, it should not be at the foreground.
Have you visited Korea? What time?
I've been a few times in Korea, maybe 4 or 5 times, but not so often.
Do you like Korea?
Yes, I like Korea. Korean food is great. Well, also, maybe I could add also that I also very much like Korea in my field of expertise, looking at this sort of technology related art and design, in that the technology adoption in Korea is crazy high. So the sort of technologies that people use in everyday context and take for granted here is much higher than, let's say, in Germany. So I think there's lots of potential to do experimental work because of the attitude towards technology here.
So AR technology could experimentally used in Korea, compared to world. What do you think?
Yes, I think it would be very easy to start developing experimental and practical work in Korea because the framework is there, the infrastructure is there, much more easy.
Which part of Korea, like a business or AR could used experimentally?
I think there are many areas, but for me, there's of course lots of this kind of direct kind of efficiency way of thinking about AR, wayfinding, show me the next store to so and so, point out where the restaurant is. These are for me kinds of applications that, more than they are about AR, they are about location-based information. And there's already many, many different location-based information systems around. The fact that you can look through this little window into the building and know that there's a particular kind of restaurant in there, for me that is not a value added. That is not the sort of the best part of what AR has to bring. For me, there are things like using the real physical space as a frame of reference to understanding complex information, that it gets really interesting. One of my students did work, his graduating work, looking at information visualization in situ. So he would, for example, he would use a mobile device, you point it at a product, let's say a packaging of a coffee, and then he used AR to kind of create this fountain of water flowing out of this packaging and filling a cube on the floor of water. So it's this sort of watery surface floating on the floor that equated to the amount of water required to make that package full of coffee. So it's the virtual water that you would need to irrigate the plants to grow them, and so all the water required for the production. Now, if you see a volume of water virtually floating on the floor, but it's in the context of the real space, it becomes more tangible, and therefore it can change the way people think. And I think this has much more power in how AR, I think, could sort of take us to the next level. So it can be very emotional, the communication through relating non-physical objects into the immediate physical space. It's not about labeling things, but it's about giving this sort of value added through understanding complex information in relation to the real space. So, yeah.
Yesterday I learned from the lectures, AR is like a science fiction life come to reality in our society, I think, and it could develop rapidly and it could change our life a lot. So, what is your opinion about it?
Yeah, actually, I think an interesting anecdote to that, a kind of a grandfather of science fiction, William Gibson, he wrote in sometimes late 80s Neuromancer, and in that he kind of envisioned virtual reality. It became real reality, and it failed in its original form, but it's kind of resurrected in computer game industry. William Gibson was back in the 80s writing, and in the 90s also writing in sort of not so distant. He was writing about near future, I don't know, 20, 50 years into the future. Through his career, he's kind of come closer and closer to the present. And today, his latest books they are science fiction, but the science and the technology in his fiction is today's technology. So there's no magic whatsoever that is out of the reach of today's world, but he is kind of creating realities that could happen with the technology around us. And I think designers, artists also including writers, are people who create the visions towards which we then develop the technologies. So I think he was really, really influential in his early science fiction work that kind of paved the way to what virtual reality became. And so it's the artist who can push the technology into new directions. I don't think that there is kind of teleological goal towards which the technology development is going. We are creating it according to our aspirations and, our goals and our values. And we as creative people then are the ones who also set those values. So where is it going? It's up for us to decide.
I heard many times somebody say if you new technology or some different technology, there is more possibility to successfully do what you dreamed or for as artist or designer. And you said differently yesterday, technology is not important as we think, to do something.
Right. Well, yeah, okay. Well, what I think I tried to say...
Yes, I personally, I agree with you.
No, so also what I was saying earlier on, the idea that the use of technology for technology's sake is not necessarily the best way to use it. Designers and artists, the way I'm also working is very much about trying to create an experience the simplest possible way that is enough to bring the idea to its fullest. So whereas technology developers oftentimes try to create universal systems, platforms for other people to do stuff. So they try to kind of solve all the possible ways of using it. Which means that then you have to compromise everywhere. So you have to compromise that, oh, it can't be bigger than this because if people who are this height want to use it, then it's not possible if it's taller than so and so. So there's lots of these kind of constraints that become assumptions based on the platform. But the platform has no content, no meaning yet by itself. So as artist or designer using these technologies, you can, because you are not developing platforms, you can kind of focus, and you don't have to solve all the possible other ways of using the technology, because you only use it one way for your installation, your artwork, your own purpose. So in that sense, it's important to understand what it's capable of, but it's also very important to understand the sort of rationale behind it, so that you can go outside the box and look at it and clean all the things that you don't need for your own work.
Can you give advice to artists or designer who wants to use AR technology?
Yeah. I guess my advice would be that, so of course, as I said already earlier on, augmented reality is one technology amongst many, and artists and designers, you know, they use technology many times to comment on its use, maybe redefine it as something else. So to think of so to have an artist who would you shouldn't really enforce an artist to use AR, because then the enforcing of that one technology becomes the reason to use it, and then it becomes very self-referential, I think. Whereas for an artist who wants to use something like AR, should be really interested in it beyond just looking at the surface. So really experiment with it, see what it's good for, and then maybe use it, maybe not. But have it as a kind of a part of the vocabulary with which you can then design experiences. But not kind of have AR as kind of God-given, that okay, now I must do something with AR. Of course I know that there can be more like a political agenda or like a master plan to be using AR for some purpose, and therefore there's an invitation for artists and designers, could you do something with AR? Maybe. But that invitation already, by definition, then gives a kind of a spin and narrows the focus of what the artists might be doing with AR if it was just one of the tools amongst many, rather than it has to be at the center. So open-mindedness, understanding of technology, really critical thinking about what it's currently used for and how it could be different. I think this would be maybe the key ideas that I would give as an advice for designers and artists who wants to perhaps use AR.
Last question. Whatever you want to just tell the Korean, there is something to tell about?
Now, in this mindset of looking at technology use in the present, also, so on one hand, the more creative uses, and what is Korea specific, I feel very much, is the sort of high level of technology adoption, like adaptation and taking and trying things out. I like this sort of fearlessness here. But of course, lots of that has still this sort of technology jubilation. So more technology is seen good by definition. So maybe what I would really like to see is this technology trend going on, but in parallel having this sort of going back to the roots taking place, people doing, I don't know, analog interventions, using ideas that they've developed from gaming or from use of computer in general and applying them into the analog real space, whether it's about having board game sessions with your friends or funny experiences in the city that is helped by technology perhaps, but it's not the point. So yeah, combining the past and future in sort of creative ways.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.